This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and we're going to have a juicy conversation today with Sergei Kutrovski. And we are talking today about what problems need to be solved in the coffee industry. And I particularly wanted to have this conversation with you, given that this is the overarching theme of the podcast for this year. But the reason I wanted to have it with you is because you are a small business owner and you are a cafe manager. You are intersectional to a lot of what goes on in the cafe environment. So from your perspective, what are the problems that need to be solved in the coffee industry?
I mean, how many times have we talked about branding? Right?
It's kind of a theme on this podcast, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's a reason for that. I think just I'm going to repeat a few things you've said, but we can dig into that, is the fact that, like, what is coffee, right?
Yeah.
Like coffee in general, for the general public, not coffee professionals, is misunderstood. Like we, like Mark and I from Mir, we literally talked about like processing. We didn't dive deep, but there's so much misunderstanding within that context. And there's no like communication or understanding, or I said misunderstanding, but there's no like ground level, like easy language to consume around that. It either gets super complicated, which for me, I like that, but it may not make sense for just the general consumer who drinks a cup of joe, and why that even matters. So topics like that, I think a classic, what I remember about my childhood is the dairy campaign. Like that was going on in the United States. I was fairly young, so I didn't really grasp like what was going on, but I remember the got milk statement and the stickers that were going around, just the posters that were everywhere in my elementary school. And some of the ones that I like vividly remember is Shaun White with a mustache. Like I live next to a very popular snowboarding skiing area here in the Pacific Northwest. And like Shaun White meant a lot to me. And when he had that mustache, there was something important about dairy. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? I may not understood everything, but it caught my attention. And like, my question is like, that's not why is that not happening in the coffee industry? Like,
but I want to say something on that. It is sort of happening in the coffee industry. It's just that the people who are controlling that narrative are using George Clooney and Brad Pitt.
Oh, right.
To tell us what coffee is. And what is it? It's Nescafe and it's Nespresso.
Fair. Yep.
Right? Like it really leans directly into your point that are doing this. The big brands are defining what coffee should mean to everyday consumers. And we are not participating in helping to define what that should mean. And so in a time where we're approaching an inflationary clusterfuck, what we've got is companies like Nestle that are telling the general public you should be spending about 13 cents on a cup of coffee, which is Nescafe Blend 43. And they are using George Clooney and Brad Pitt to sell that message. What chance does your $8 mocha have in that environment?
Yeah. Right. And that's also, I think, with companies like that, yes, it's branding, but it's also more or less marketing. So, and those two, they cross over, but they're not the same thing.
No, they're not.
They're not. And then branding is more about like communication, and marketing is about basically using communication to purchase a product. So that commercial, like I think we're talking about the same one that I remember, it doesn't tell me anything about coffee. And again, like, what is that? Is that the beverage? Is that the seed? It doesn't explain that at all. It just, there's a general statement. It looks cool. I should get it. Right. That's marketing. That's not branding. Like,
right. But I would push back on that a little bit and say, but it is because of the absence of the other thing.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, because we're not presenting the other side of the discussion, they set the brand.
Yeah.
They are telling the general public that this is what the brand of coffee is because this is all that's being spoken about.
Right. There's still a form of communication happening. So there's still some information leaving that, even though it's just an ad, for sure. And that is, again, like you said, that's exactly why there's a branding problem in general. Yeah. And there's the challenging part is, I know personally myself, I am stuck in an echo chamber. I own a roasting company. I manage a cafe. Mm-hmm. The people I talk to, my community online, folks who know a coffee cherry or understand what a coffee cherry is. So sometimes the difficult part is, I think this happens a lot within coffee, is we get into those echo chambers and we only talk to our group and we only have our language, and we are stuck in that it actually not only does it disconnect us from the general public and helping educate and communicate what coffee is, but it actually kind of creates so much distance that we know sometimes just don't care enough at some point, because it works for us, you know what I mean? And to a degree, I think a lot of coffee companies, and I'm also like right now, I'm kind of processing with you because I'm like thinking, okay, like, yeah, of course, Mir wants to be prosperous financially. We want to make an impact. Like, we want those things. And part of that requires like good communication, but also storytelling is the key to good branding. Like,
hell yeah.
What kind of stories are we telling? Are our stories based on like to sell more product, or are we actually adding value through the storytelling, which also in return will sell more product? Like, don't get me wrong, it's going to go the long way. But the key is like, we're trying to create an understanding and trying to educate, again, not because like I know everything about coffee processing, but because I have some sort of experience, and then I can also do some research. Like, right. You know what I mean? And
you have access, which is another thing. So tell me, whose responsibility is it to shift that narrative?
Did we talk about this in the town hall?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's okay. My personality wants to take the blame and just says, yeah, I think a roaster plays a big role in that for a few reasons. As a roaster, I have not only access to the coffee producer, I have the connection there, I have the relationship there. I can get that understanding, but I also have a net of folks who are just throwing in the Mr. Coffee and they're willing to listen. So I can hold on to both sides, and I actually can be the means of passing on the information. So to a degree, I think the roaster has that, has the ability, has the like advantage to be able to communicate that. But then again, what I'm seeing within coffee producers is coffee producers are just blown up on social media. Like, I don't know, it's just me, like coffee producers are, I'm thinking of a few like very popular ones, like from the El Virgil farm. Like, they have a very strong social media presence. So they have a voice. And that's one of the things that in third wave and specialty we've talked about for a long time, is the fact that we want farmers and producers to have a voice. And I believe they're getting that voice. So what do we need to do to create possibilities for that voice to be louder? Like, what can I do? What can coffee professionals do so that the language, we need to work on language. That's a big one, right? Just in general, like fermentation, like what does that mean? Like unpack that one. I mean, I still have a hard time, like wash coffees are fermented. Yeah. Like I thought naturals.
All coffees are fermented.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, even talking about like things like that, like we have to work on our language. That's part of the problem.
Who sets that tone?
Everyone. I mean, I don't know. Am I like that? Again, I feel like I have the access to be able to communicate that, one, because of the podcast, the social media presence, the connection that I have with my guest and client base. Like I have that access. But then again, I don't, again, talked about the producer, talked about the roaster, but there's also bigger people at play that have way more access than I do, who should be communicating.
Why I'm laughing is because, folks, I want you to think about who you think Sergei's talking about and just assume that's who he's talking about. Yeah. Because he's being very diplomatic right now. And I don't want to out him by saying who he's talking about, but it starts with an S and ends with an A.
Yeah.
So, and this is the big challenge. And I want to ask you this as a cafe owner. Who do you take your cues from when it comes to understanding that stuff? Do you take it from the governing bodies? I mean, that's a terrible term because they're not a governing body, but they're a trade organization. Or do you take it from the producers, or do you take it from your previous learning? Where do you take your cues from around that kind of stuff?
Yeah. One, from a cafe perspective, again, not even as a roaster, but from a cafe manager. What I think is great is the coffee roasters that we've partnered with create that dialogue already for us. They give us access to information, which is amazing. Like I don't need the SCA to tell me something that they probably don't even know because they're not actually doing the work. But I can actually contact the roaster. I can talk to people that I do know who do have that access to that information. And actually eliminating a lot of we don't want to play telephone, right? We want to go to the source to get that, and we want to communicate clearly. So in order to do that, I want to get closer to the producer. But I think the challenge here is I'm talking about this from a coffee professional perspective. Like I said, I have that access. What happens to someone does someone even care if they're just throwing coffee into a coffie pot?
It's such a good question. It's such a good question. And 20 years in the coffee industry, honestly, I haven't been able to answer that question yet. Because I speak to people and ask them, how much information do you want about coffee? Mm-hmm. What's going to change the needle to get you to stop drinking instant coffee? And I buy them different brew methods. I'll buy drip bags if, pour overs are too complicated and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, a lot of them say the same thing. You're missing the point. I'm not drinking coffee because I want to understand the whole supply chain. You're making it too complicated for me. I don't give a fuck about what region, from what country this coffee came from. Knowing it's from Ethiopia is enough for me, and sometimes too much.
Yep. I mean, you saw our poll about that.
Yeah.
That was exactly it. Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's okay, so then how can I help achieve the objectives of what I think is going to get there? And honestly, 20 years in the industry, I still don't know whether we should be putting the producer in front of the consumer or whether we should just be celebrating the producer up to the point of where the barista is and then leaving the rest up, let the consumer just have their experience about it and give them a QR code so that if they want to know more, they can go and check it out. Now with I can tell you very clearly, with clients that we've tried that with, they get almost zero people scanning the QR code.
Yeah, I feel that. We just made a decision earlier to not print QR codes because we didn't think the ROI, not financial, but even just simple information wise, it wasn't going to be accessed. So I feel that I'm skeptical about sharing this dream on a platform like yours, but I do have a dream, and this may be out there, it might not be possible, but here's what I would like to see. A lot of the times we talk about us coffee professionals going to origin, right? And it starts from the perspective of a coffee professional. I'm not even going to think about what would it take to get a coffee general consumer to go to origin, even if it was paid for, just the time. I think that would be very low, right? But I think there's also a disconnect between the producer and the general consumer. And I think there's some kind of joy for the producer to see the consumption of their hard work.
Oh yeah. And I would take that even further. Sorry, go on, finish.
I was going to say, how can we bring the producer to the consumer the other way?
And how can we bring the producer and the cafe owner together? Because they are experiencing such correlated issues, because producers see cafe owners selling their coffee for $5 a cup when they're not even getting that much a pound.
Yeah.
And what they're saying is, well, hold on, you guys should be driving around in Lamborghinis because you're selling our coffee for this much. What they're not realizing is the profit margins are so razor thin that the cafe owners are barely surviving, which mirrors exactly what's going on for producers.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if we can close that loop and start the conversation there without having the disconnect of the roaster and the importer and the exporter, separating those two things out, I don't know what the end product of that is, but I definitely know that when I've told producers that information, they're really shocked. One hope that I think that is going to improve things is you've got now, thanks to COVID, you've got localized coffee drinking communities happening, localized to coffee growing regions. And so Willie Gihoza was talking about how in Rwanda now they've got a specialty coffee scene opening up in Rwanda that consumes the coffee that is grown, the specialty coffee that's grown on the farms there. So that's a really great thing, because, and here's where I think I'd never thought about this before, but consumers in Rwanda know that coffee is grown in Rwanda.
Yeah.
They are going to be more likely connected to paying for that product because they understand that this is a Rwandan grown product. I even see it in the supermarkets here. Our supermarkets write Australian grown across all the produce that is actually local. And consumers tend to look to buy things and support that stuff that's grown locally. Yeah. And I'd never thought about that before, but
yeah, I mean, that's exciting to hear that. I didn't know about like Rwanda, and that makes sense because there's pride behind that. It almost feels your own, like you're buying your own, like you may have not grown it, but it is yours. And the reality is, like, one of our visions for Mir is to see that happen in Indonesia. The reality is of the market, and Indonesian coffee doesn't have the best, rap for producing high quality specialty. So one of the challenging things is there's a lot of coffee farmers and producers who are working really, really hard to crank out volume, and they need to do volume because the only market they know, is the physical market they go to. So they don't know. So there's not enough of that kind of like pride to see like a quality product. And the wild thing is that's tied so close to the identity of the coffee producer and that person. So therefore, like, I create this cheap product, it doesn't really matter, nothing matters. And there's that attitude. And again, there's that personal culture that's growing. That's not positive. What happens when that coffee producer is able to export? And I've seen that to be like life-changing. And when it becomes, because again, the West is over glorified, it's like, well, as soon as you got your coffee to the United States, all of a sudden you've made it, right? The reality is that's not true, but it also creates then this sense of like, oh, I can make a difference from a farming perspective. Like, oh, like, yeah, if I just implement these small practices of raised beds, like my coffee tastes better, but now I can sell it to cafes in Indonesia. Like it just changes the cycle. And it's not about like, oh, let's just take all that coffee and move it to the United States. No, it's about seeing the possibility that you can create a new cycle and you can actually send that coffee into Indonesian specialty cafes, which are blowing up and
big time,
are tasty and looking great. Like that to me, that makes me come alive. I'm like, I want to see that happen more.
Because it's a real solution.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure. Unfortunately,
we have to wrap up this conversation. You and I could talk for days and days and days about this subject. Sergei, I just want to thank you for your generosity of thinking and sharing and your openness to exploring these ideas with us. I really value it very much. And I think that you're a great asset to our industry. And I can't wait to see what you and Mark achieve with Mirror and what you and your team are achieving with Narrative.
Oh, that means so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I would love to say more. And I keep saying thank you so much for reaching out and always staying connected. Like, it was sad to see you move, but we've stayed connected and
nothing's changed.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being that voice. And even though sometimes it's hard for folks to listen, it is sobering reality, and you keep pushing the industry forward. And I really respect and appreciate you. Thank you.
Where can people find you and Mirror and Narrative?
Instagram is easy. It's still one of the most popular ways to stay connected. Narrative's website is also easy to check out. It's narrative.coffee. So you should definitely check us out. Check out our coffee program and how we source our roasted coffee. So we have a cool cupping procedure. So maybe if you're a roaster, send some in. That'd be great. But for Mirror, also mirrorcoffeeroasters.com is easy. We're working on a few changes coming up, hopefully by the end of the summer. And then Instagram is great. The podcast, Mirror Coffee Roasters. It's called warm-up sessions as well, but Mirror Coffee Roasters will get you there. And look that up on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. It's all there. So check us out.
And we will have links to everything in the show notes. Cool. So please make sure that you check out the show notes and go and follow them on Instagram. Thanks again, Sergei. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Easily top 3 of the year for me. Easily.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed this. We'll see you in the next series. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.